We'll get started. Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce several guests this evening. So I'm gonna do that first, and then there'll be a presentation, and then an overview of the plan, the recommendation that went to the school board, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. So I'm going to start with Dr. Conrad Eiber. He's a clinician in pulmonary, critical care, and sleep medicine, as well as a clinical sleep researcher and leader with a focus on standardization of diagnostic procedures and therapies in sleep medicine. Dr. Eiber is a leader in sleep diagnostic methods, as demonstrated by his role of developer, editor, and project manager for the revision of the primary standard for physiologic measures of sleep, an international project that required extensive coordination of 6 task forces and incorporated a series of evidence-based review papers. Dr. Eiber has provided leadership through his roles as president of both the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and the Association of Professional Sleep Societies, as board member of the Sleep Medicine and Research Foundation and the American Insomnia Association, as author of the Electronic Health Record Handbook for Sleep Medicine, and as associate editor of the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine. In summary, his qualifications and skills emanate from several activities, including clinical and epidemiologic research in sleep-related breathing disorders, local, national, and international leadership positions in sleep medicine, and critical writing experience in standards of practice and editing. And finally, he has biological content knowledge of sleep and circadian physiology issues for instrumentation and devices. Okay, next, Dr. Kyla Wallstrom is a senior research fellow and lecturer in the Department of Organizational Leadership, Policy, and Development in the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Minnesota, where she has worked for the past 26 years. Most recently, she was the director of the Center for Applied Research and Educational Improvement. Dr. Wallstrom received her PhD in the area of educational policy development with a focus on school change. Prior to her appointment at the University of Minnesota in 1990, she had 19 years of school experience as an elementary classroom teacher, a special education teacher, a school principal, and a district administrator of special education. She is the primary investigator of the original research on school start times that began in 1996. In 2010, she was awarded a federal grant from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to continue research on the outcomes for later school start times. Her 20-year study of the effect of the later start time on high school students has influenced school policies across the U.S. and has been featured in publications and media ranging from Congressional Quarterly and Rolling Stone magazine to Scientific America, Newsweek, NPR's All Things Considered, and PBS's Frontline. Dr. Wallstrom is the recipient of the MASCD National Research Award for her groundbreaking study of the effects of later starting times for high schools. And Dr. Rachel Whittam is a social I'm having a hard time with that word, epidemiologist and associate professor in the division of and there it is again, epidemiology and community health at the University of Minnesota. Her research focuses on how policy influences chronic disease-related behaviors. She has explored the role sleep plays in healthy youth development and how policy can promote healthful sleep. Dr. Whittam, the principal investigator of the Start Learn Adolescent Sleep Cohort Studies. Dr. Whittam will take the lead on the presentation this evening, along with Dr. Eiber, and of course, Dr. Wallstrom is available too. She's attending remotely, and so we're hoping that in a remote part of the state where the Wi-Fi is a little unpredictable, so we're hoping that she will be able to hang in there, and she is certainly going to participate in the Q&A if her Wi-Fi holds up for us. So we have a real strong team of presenters, and so I think we'll move right into that. Dr. Whittam.
Thank you so much, Dr. K. And I'm going to share my screen. I really appreciate you inviting me to present to the community and talk to the school district tonight. I know that doing this virtually can be a bit awkward. It's sort of inherently weird. So please, if there's anything that isn't working, feel free to just jump in and interrupt me and say, I can't see your slides, or I can't hear you anymore, or something else needs to happen. That's totally okay. So let me see, I'm gonna hopefully share some slides. Can everyone see my slides?
Can you turn my mic on? Dr. Whittem, can you just give me 1 second? So one thing, we have cards for questions. So if you would, as we go through tonight, if you would write down your questions, and then those will be collected. So during the presentation, this presentation, and then my presentation, and then we'll move into the Q&A. So I forgot to mention that earlier. Okay, it's all yours.
Great, thank you so much. So once again, thank you for inviting me. I wanted to talk a bit about this issue in a larger sense, first of all, and then talk a little bit more specifically about some of the research I've led, actually with Kyla and Khan, on later school start times in school districts here in the Twin Cities. So we have some data that I think is really relevant to you and your school district from some of your neighbors. So first, I just would encourage everyone to sort of think about their day and what their daily routine looks like. I mean, for me, here I am, I have my life, and part of my day consists of, my work time. If you're a student, it's school time, roughly a third of your day. Maybe if you're fortunate, a third of your day can also be leisure time, time that you spend with your family, doing physical activity with your friends, doing leisure reading, whatever you like to do. And then the other third of your day is on sleep. So this is something I really like to emphasize with audiences. Sometimes we sort of forget about sleep because it's a time when we're not aware. We think of it as a disposable part of the day for both us and our kids, something that if we have a lot of work to do or a lot of family commitments, we sort of borrow from that section of our life. But it's a big part of our life, and it's an important part of our life for making the rest of our lives work. So let's think a little bit about kids and sleep, and specifically adolescents. So the National Sleep Foundation recommends that adolescents get somewhere around 8.5 to 9.25 hours of sleep per night. And really, somewhere around 9 or just over 9 hours of sleep is what is optimal for adolescents. A lot of people think that adolescents are just sort of smaller, moodier adults, and maybe they only need 7 or 8 hours of sleep, and that's really not the case. Adolescents need almost as much sleep as younger kids get. So despite this, and despite this being the need that adolescents have in order to function optimally, most teenagers are getting far less than that. In fact, half of US 16-year-olds regularly get less than 7 hours of sleep on school nights. So that means that they are pretty severely short on sleep. Now, there really is an adolescent sleep crisis in the United States. Very few, I'm sorry, was there a question? Oh, must have been some feedback. So very few adolescents get this optimal amount of sleep. Less than 8% of adolescents are in that 9-hour range. And something that I think is especially concerning, especially these days, as we're more and more focused on equity issues, equity in health, equity in education, equity in opportunities, is that there are some pretty stark disparities with sleep. So girls, BIPOC students, BIPOC adolescents, non-whites, and those who are from lower income backgrounds are even more likely to have less than 7 hours of sleep a night. So this might be a little bit hard of a couple of figures for you to read, depending on where you're sitting in the auditorium or where you are at home. But basically, these two figures show, if you look along the bottom axis, it starts at age 12 and goes up to 19. As kids move through adolescence, they're getting fewer and fewer hours of sleep. This represents the proportion of kids in the United States that are getting at least 7 hours of sleep. And remember, 7 just isn't enough anyway. And the reason why there's more than one line is because these are representing cohorts of kids who've been in high school at different points in time. So the earliest cohort are kids that were in high school in the 90s, in the early 90s, 1991 and 95. The latest cohort are kids that were in high school in 2011 to 2012. And what you can see is that despite the fact that they all have this pattern of getting fewer hours of sleep as they move through high school, the more recent cohorts of kids, if you went to high school more recently, you're getting even less sleep probably than your predecessors. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There are things that have changed in our society, and there's ways that we structure our lives, our families' lives, and our kids' lives that are responsible for that, and school start times are one of them. I'll get to that in a little more in just a second. So why do we care? I mean, why is it important if adolescents aren't getting enough sleep? I mean, they're young, they're strong, they can sort of deal with it, you might think, but unfortunately, we've seen in the research that lack of sleep in adolescence is associated with a variety of risk behaviors, including substance use, behaviors related to safety and injury, drunk driving, stuff like that, stuff that we really don't want to see our teenagers engaging in. There's also longer term consequences of not getting enough sleep, and these include depression and some chronic disease risk increases. So diabetes, prediabetes, cardiovascular risk. And once again, injury is always a concern for anyone who's short on sleep or not getting adequate quantity and quality of sleep. So the way I think of sleep is I think of it as a fundamental cause. It's this incredible resource that all of us potentially have access to if we have a good sleep environment and a good schedule. It's a resource that allows us to live our lives in a really productive way. It allows us to learn, to be strong, to engage in positive social interactions, to be productive in society. It's one of these things that if you have enough of it, it's almost like money. If you have enough of it, a lot of other things in life become easy. And I'm sure for the grown-ups in the audience, most of you probably are grown-ups, although I'm sure there are a few adolescents that are listening into this meeting, you can sort of relate to this in your own life. On days or weeks when you haven't gotten enough sleep, everything is hard. Every aspect of your life is hard when you don't have this kind of resource. So what's the problem? Why can't teens get enough sleep? Well, there's a lot of things going on. Adolescence is this time when society, the social environment, and aspects of the adolescent brain are sort of all coming together, creating a perfect storm that is potentially getting in the way of healthy sleep. There's a lot of things that really the volume turns up on once you get to high school. There's more homework, there's more technology, maybe you have jobs and family responsibilities that you've never had before. There's social pressure, there's more caffeine use, there's a desire for teens to have more autonomy and do more activities, all sorts of things. However, one of the most sort of salient issues, one of the features in teenagers' lives that probably exert some of the strongest influences on their sleep behavior are their schedule and early high school start times. And this is really interesting because the vast majority of US high schools start quite early. They start before 8:30 a.m. Very few high schools have actually taken the action that your district is considering to shift high school start times a bit later. So the high schools who have done this are really districts that have sort of been on the forefront of really thinking about how they can optimize, their high school and their high school environment for teen health and well-being. So what's going on? So like I said, one of the most salient factors contributing to teen sleep deficiency is these early school start times, which in the US are highly common. In fact, it's such an issue that in 2014, the American Academy of Pediatrics issued a policy statement, and many other health and education organizations and professional bodies have since issued similar policy statements that high school should start no earlier than 8:30 a.m. So why is this? Why is this so important, this time of the day? Like, why does it matter? Why can't we just, have teens like shift their schedule around to fit an earlier schedule? Well, there's a few things that are happening. Like I said, there's some changes that are happening in the adolescent brain around the time of puberty. One is that teen circadian clocks shift about 2 hours later relative to their childhood timing. So the nocturnal melatonin is released later. This is a neurobiological change. This is not something that's related to peer pressure. This is not something that's related to it being cool to like stay up or something like that. This is something that's happening in the biology of their brains. And after this happens, it becomes quite difficult for most, not all, but most adolescents to fall asleep prior to 11 p.m. or wake before 8 a.m. Another thing that happens is that their sleep drive tends to build up more slowly at the onset of adolescence. So sleep drive is sort of like the sleep pressure that accumulates after, multiple hours of being awake. If you think about little babies, their sleep drive, they fall asleep after only, being awake for an hour or two. Grown-ups and adolescents, their sleep drive accumulates much more slowly. So here's what's going on. If a school has a 7:30 start time, and an adolescent really can't fall asleep before 11 p.m. and they have to rise at 6 a.m. or earlier to arrive to school on time, you've created a bottleneck. This teenager, even if they have the best intentions, is not going to be able to fit in 9 hours of sleep with that early high school start time. And one of our colleagues, Mary Carskaden, who's an adolescent sleep researcher, she was once, I have this quote from her, she was once talking about an adolescent in one of her studies, and how she works in Rhode Island, and she said this poor girl was flying in from Rhode Island, from California every morning. So this teenager was not flying in from California. She lived in Rhode Island, but her body schedule was so off from what her high school was demanding of her. It was like this child was constantly living in a jet lag where she was sort of 3 hours off. She was having that feeling of flying in from the West Coast and really being a mess because she wasn't getting adequate sleep due to her high school schedule. So this brings me to the START study, and I'm just going to quickly go through this slide. We were funded to take a look at the natural experiment that was presented to us from a few school districts in the Northwest Metro who were deciding, making the change a few years ago to shift their high school start times later. And here's how this study worked. We had a bunch of high schools in the study. In the spring of 2016, all of the high schools across the district started early at 7:30 a.m. By spring 2017, 2 of them had shifted their start times later and the rest remained early. And the same was true for 2018. So we were able to compare what happened to the kids that went to these high schools that made a change versus the kids that didn't. And something that's really unique about this study is we were able to follow these kids over time. We were really interested in if there are impacts, are they durable? How long do they last? Do they fade away? Do high school kids start, maybe at first the later start time works, but then they sort of rearrange their lives and shift things and they're no longer going to bed at the right time and it's all a wash. So let me tell you about what we found. So here's our study. We had 2,400 adolescents in our study, and we had a sub-study of these kids where we measured their sleep using objective measures. So we surveyed them. We surveyed all the kids, but we really wanted to get some detailed information on the kids as well. So we had them wear wrist actigraphs. This is an objective measure of sleep. They wear it all the time for a week. And you don't have to rely on kids telling you what time they went to bed. This objective monitor, it's like a Fitbit, will give you data on what time they went to bed, what time they wake up, and how well they slept during the night. So I just wanted to show you some of the demographics of the schools that we were in. We were in the Elk River School District, the Buffalo School District, and Wayzata. And it has demographics that I think are very similar to the demographics of your school district. Here's race, ethnicity. And I just wanted to show you what we found at baseline. These teens, all of these schools started at 7:30, and very, very few of them, only 15% were getting this bare minimum 8.5 hours of sleep a night, up to 10 hours. So at the start of this study, most of these adolescents were not getting enough sleep. And once again, like I said, it's an equity issue. The white adolescents were getting more sleep than the non-white adolescents. The adolescents who are not getting free and reduced lunch were getting more sleep than the ones who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So the start times impact everyone, but they impact teens that are coming from disadvantage to an even greater degree, which is a real problem and a real issue. These kids were tired. They, half of the students reported that they needed help waking up to get to school. While most ultimately were able to wake up and get to school on time, close to 15% said that at least once they were late to school because they didn't wake up on time. And most of them said that they are pretty regularly sleepy. Again, this is when the schools started at 7:30 a.m. For those of you who are parents of adolescents, I'm sure this is familiar. Some of them were so sleepy, a fair number of them were so sleepy that they reported that they had fallen asleep in class, 30% of them. So I just want to show you some findings that we've seen across a few studies, and then we'll come back to the START study, which we did here, like I said, in Elk River, Buffalo, and Wayzata. This was some research that we did with some of Kyla's data that we had looked at mental health and start time. And we were seeing that greater sleep duration was associated with a lesser depression score. So this was sort of a finding that we've seen in a variety of studies, and it was interesting to see it also in one of the earlier school start time studies. So what did we think would happen when the schools that were shifting their start time later? We thought that these kids would sleep longer, and that they would have a sleep pattern that's more in line with what we know about adolescent circadian tendencies, and that in some ways they'd have some reduced sleep efficiency, which I have a note there about that. It's actually a good thing. What we find sometimes is that adolescents who aren't getting enough sleep, their sleep is almost too efficient. They fall asleep the second their head hits the pillow. They don't have any of these natural awakenings that we see in sort of more healthy sleep situations where people are getting more adequate sleep. So hopefully this will animate. I hope you can see this animation. This is one of the nicest figures I've made. So the blue curve blob, so right here is like the beginning of the study. The blue curve blob are the kids that went to late start schools, and the red curve are the kids that went to early start schools. So at baseline, they were all getting the same amount of sleep. Here's year 2 after the school's delayed, and you can see this blue blob is moving to the right. They're getting more minutes of sleep per night compared to their counterparts that were still going to schools where they had to wake up for a 7:30 start time. And in fact, we found that these teenagers who were going to the schools where they shifted their start time later to 8:30 or later were getting about 45 minutes more sleep per night on school nights, even after 2 years. So this was a really big deal. Once again, if you don't like watching the blue blobs, you can see our delayed start schools and our comparison schools. Baseline was when they all started at the same time. And actually we had some baseline differences, but if you look at it over time, the delayed start schools, these kids are getting more than 8 hours of sleep, just a touch more than 8 hours of sleep. The kids in the comparison schools that had to get up for a 7:30 school start time throughout the 3-year period of our study, they're getting less sleep as time goes on. And I want to really quickly show you a few things. So we saw increased sleep on weekdays, which was great. We know the kids aren't getting enough sleep on these school days. Another interesting thing we saw was the kids were getting less sleep on weekends. And this is actually a really good sign. Kids, when they're not getting enough sleep on school nights, they have to make up for it. And it's not the best way to do things, but they sort of tend to make up for it by oversleeping on the weekends. So it was really positive to see that kids were doing less of this oversleeping on weekends. That meant that they were probably getting closer to a healthy amount of sleep on their school days. The other thing that we noticed, we were really interested in, after these teens had been with later school start times for a few years, we were interested in, well, are their bedtimes just going to get later and later? Is the effect of shifting the start time going to be washed out? A lot of people had said that. Well, you can shift the start time later. It'll work for a little while, but after a while, the kids are just going to go to bed at 1 a.m. and you're not going to get any effect anymore. We didn't find that at all. So teens in the late start schools and the early start schools went to bed at the same time. And this really points to the fact that this is about a biological and neurobiological aspect of teen brains. It's not about them being lazy and just trying to stay up super late. They just aren't that tired until around 11 p.m. and that's when they're tired and that's when they go to sleep. So our later start school kids, they were going to bed at the same time as the kids that had to get up for a 7:30 start. So I just want to, before I stop talking a little bit, I need to always give a super big thank you to everyone. This is not the entire list, but we had a big study team working on this project. It was a huge undertaking. And of course, the school districts. I feel so fortunate to have been welcomed into these school districts to do our research. It was a really exciting experience. And I want to end with a New York Times op-ed piece that Erin Carroll wrote last spring about how, coronavirus has made it obvious teenagers should start school later. So as you probably remember, there was no school last spring, and it was an interesting opportunity, I think, for a lot of people and families and parents to see, how teens do when they aren't constricted to a particular schedule. A lot of people were reporting that their teens were doing better when they didn't have to get up so early. They were getting more sleep. And I think that what we've seen in the last year with everything that's gone on, school being shut down, moving to hybrid schedules, moving to virtual schedules, is that, things don't necessarily have to be the way that we always thought that they had to be. It's been a painful year. I need things to go back to a more normal soon. But it has been a really interesting year to sort of see what things would be like if we tweaked our schedules a little bit, and to see what types of tweaks are actually possible. So this is my last slide. I think I'll stop sharing so I can see you, and maybe Khan and Kyla can chime in and add anything that I might have forgotten.
Well, I don't think you forgot anything, Rachel. That was wonderful. I think, one of the misconceptions that you reflected on was the fact that this is a biological phenomenon. The other reflection is that the biology of sleep is a imperative for brain development and for stability, for functioning and performance, and that the 8 hours and a third of our lives is spent doing that, because we're remodeling literally hundreds of trillions of connections in our brain and cleaning out the essentially debris of the activity. And so it's a time-dependent function. And the other, I think, reflection is that this is a biological necessity. The third is that there is a circadian change, a change in the timing. Everybody will have exceptions in their classrooms, in their families, of a child who might be different, might not delay as much. But those are exceptions. And when we talk about doing something generally good for our students, we have to think about all of our students. So the last reflection, I guess, I would make is that because there's a difference in elementary school and in high school, to some extent, this is a phenomenon that begins around the age of 11 or 12, this delay that becomes very dominant, and where the sleep debt is at its greatest. Then they are actually the more vulnerable group, which is maybe counterintuitive. It isn't the elementary school children who are vulnerable. It is, in fact, the high school, the 15 million high schoolers that we have in our country.
And I just want to chime in. Thanks, Khan, for those reflections. Rachel, your presentation is terrific because it shows that the research that we've been doing over the past 20, actually it's been 24 years, is consistent. It's amazing to think, but it isn't surprising. Human teenagers are human teenagers, whether this study had been done in 1996, which is when I did my first study, versus in 2016 or 2018. So it's important to realize that the human factor here, the biology of human teenagers, hasn't changed. And their need for sleep hasn't changed. And their sleepiness is, just as you indicated from the study from the Actigraph, which is objective data, which is important to have, is that they fell asleep at the same time, whether they were starting early or starting late. But having the later start mathematically, automatically gives the students more sleep. So it's just amazing how confirmatory these studies are, especially when we have the kind of data that you have that is following the students by student, not in the aggregate, but in the specific student by student. It makes it very powerful to say what we know about teens at sleep. So thank you.
All right, Jeff, I think, there you go, thank you. Well, thank you very much for the presentation and the comments. I have just a couple of slides to show. Steve, will you be bringing that up? There we go, thank you. So I'm just going to talk about where we're at here in White Bear Lake and what the recommendation has been made to the school board, and then some of the rationale behind that recommendation. Much of it you just heard about, but now just a little bit of the nuts and bolts of the proposal. So here, I don't think I'll read through this by now. If you're attending, you've probably seen this graphic. Generally, we're going to be moving we would be moving our elementary schools to 7:45 a.m. start, with the exception of Matoska at 8:30, and that's due to the fact that Matoska is the attendance area is district-wide, and so we have some kids with a much longer bus ride than the other elementaries. And then our middle schools at 9:15, North Campus would be at 8:25, South Campus 8:45, ALC at 8:40, and then Transition Education Center, the times are listed there as well. Go ahead, Steve. So key factors, local factors. So we went through a strategic planning process a few years back, and that document still drives our work, and this is something that emerged from that. And we had a variety of stakeholders involved in that process, and this is supported by Strategy 2, where we will provide expanding access to a broad range of opportunities for all students. The specific result, academic scheduling is critical to the social and emotional well-being of each student, and then to evaluate and revise start times of elementary, middle, and high school students using evidence-based best practices. Okay, next. Again, I don't need to repeat the presentation, but you just learned a lot about what the research says on adolescent sleep. So go ahead, Steve. And we're in this unique situation where we are adding on to our North Campus high school, essentially creating a new high school. And we conducted a traffic study to determine just the traffic impact of building that school. And one of the findings was that starting school at 8:30 or later would help tremendously with the traffic impact in downtown White Bear Lake, especially on Highway 61. And that's a real issue that we need to consider as we contemplate this change. Okay, go ahead. And finally, we're in a unique situation. Not every district can say this that's made this change, but by making the change that's been proposed, we would be able to run a more efficient transportation system. So we would actually be able to eliminate 7 buses from our fleet, which would have a significant cost savings, and we're estimating that to be around $600,000 a year. Now, that isn't the sole reason why we're considering it, but it certainly is a nice benefit of making the change, that there's some financial benefit. That doesn't always happen. In fact, many districts, it's a cost neutral change, or in some districts, it might even cost a little bit more to make that change. Okay, all right, so we are at a point where we'll field questions. We'll just take a minute here, and there's a couple people collecting them. I will say that we've tried to answer many of the questions that have come our way and put them on the district website. There's a web page that has, I don't know, 18 or 19 of the more commonly asked questions answered. Thank you. Okay, and before I dig into the questions, I want to introduce a whole bunch of colleagues here up on stage, and we have some others attending as well. And I apologize in advance if I overlook any of you. But was trying to anticipate where are the questions going to come from. And so we cast a very wide net in terms of who we invited here tonight to be able to answer questions. So we have Brian Peliquin, our Director of Student Activities, Matt Rebo, Youth Recreation and Middle School Sports Coordinator. I think we're probably going in order right here, pretty close to the order. We have Tim Maurer, our Director of Community Services and Recreation, Christina Anderson, our out-of-school time coordinator, Tim Wald, our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, Mike Torito, our Director of Transportation, Darcy Rodriguez, Early Childhood Coordinator, Dan Schmidt, Elementary Principal at Lincoln, Catherine Peterson, Middle School Principal at Central, Ange Nelson, one of our high school principals, and she's at, excuse me, she's at North Campus, Jen Babish, Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Lisa Oren, Director of Student Support Services, and then off stage we have others as well. I believe Matt St. Martin is here, our Assistant Activities Director, Dr. Marcellus Davis, our Director of Equity and Engagement, Matt Mons, our Director of Human Resources, John Leininger, another elementary principal, the principal at Matoska International, Brian Morris, elementary principal up in Hugo, Vanessa House is here, public health nurse, licensed school nurse, and there are probably others, and I apologize that I haven't mentioned your name. So I think we have a team here that can answer any question that comes our way. So I will start. Okay, I understand the potential 600,000, but I value the small amount of time I get with my elementary kids between work. I'm trying to read this here. Between work, don't know what that word is, and clearing up dinner. This change would take all of that away for me, keep the elementary start times as they are, put the issue to a vote, transportation versus keeping elementary start times. Transportation safe, I don't know what that word is. So if I'm butchering this, I certainly can help. I mean, I can certainly address this. I mean, I know that there are going to be changes to family routines. I think Dr. Ivor put it a good way in that this is a decision that's being made on the benefit, the well-being of really thousands of students, and we understand that that is going to mean a change in family schedules. There would be no way to keep elementary start times the way they are and change the secondary start times, the high school and middle school start times. So if that's a priority, which it is, there would be no way to do that. There would be no way to keep the elementary start times the same. All right, next. The change for elementary students would require parents to put kids to bed earlier, most likely right after dinner. What about the lack of interaction with my kids every day? I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that. I think the amount of sleep. I think elementary students, the sleep time, they're more malleable. They certainly can handle a change in sleep patterns more than adolescents can. But again, we do know that there will be an impact on families and time. And I don't know if any of our guests have any other comments on that question around elementary. So, okay. All right.
Since elementary school, oh, sorry. I was just going to say, since elementary school children tend to go to bed earlier, what we're doing is matching, and high school students go to bed later. What we're really attempting to do is meet nature. We're trying to meet their natural needs for sleep in both cases.
Thank you for that. All right, what changes will be made to keep the younger kids safe at bus stops so early in the dark mornings in winter? My bus stops do not have sidewalks. Yeah, so we're under the proposal, we are trying to target 7:10 as the earliest pickup for elementary students. We hope we can stick to that 7:10 time. But there will be a period of between mid-December and mid-January where darkness will be a factor on those earliest bus stops. And and we've tried to avoid that as much as we can, but we can't avoid it entirely. Again, given trying to balance elementary, middle, and high school, and what's shifting the start times, we've tried to find the best possible solution we can, given many factors, and that's where we've landed. Again, I don't mean to sound trite, but I would always encourage parents to make sure they're with their student at the bus stop. And in fact, we see that very often where parents are with students at bus stops even now. And certainly if that's a concern that you have, I would encourage you to do that.
Wayne, I can just jump in here now, just for a minute. So that
And even when we have those darkest times of year, that most of our bus stops, even then, will be in daylight. It'll just be those first stops on the route.
Wayne,
That'll be just as the sun is starting to rise in most cases. But during that darkest time of the year, most of our stops it'll be daylight.
One other point on that is we currently, under semi-normal circumstances, I guess, under not necessarily COVID year, but we currently have a number. It's around 250 students are scheduled to ride the bus or to get picked up. Let me back up. Middle school and high school students, we have a total of approximately 250 who are scheduled to get on the bus at between 6:30 and 6:40. That's what we're currently asking many of our secondary students to do. And we really don't want to continue doing that for our secondary students. So again, it's many factors that have been taken into consideration, and what's been proposed to the school board has taken all of these factors into consideration, and this is ultimately where we've landed. All right, and this, I just will note, these are, Mr. Thomas, you obviously have a lot of questions. These have been all yours, so I will continue with that, and then maybe there should be a follow-up if you'd like, in addition to going through these tonight. All right, so with the increase in use of electronics with teens, could that be the reason why they are getting less sleep? Why put the, let's see, burden on younger kids because teens cannot go to bed early? I'm going to turn to some of our residents, well, they are residents. They live in the Twin Cities and work at the U of M, and so I would turn that over to you.
It's really interesting. I certainly think that electronics are a really big issue related to adolescent schedules, adolescent sleep. They displace other activities. They displace physical activity. They displace homework, at least leisure time, screen use, and certainly sleep. That I don't mean to diminish that at all. It's a big deal, and it's something that I think, families really need to have their eye on as far as ensuring that there's healthy sleep going on in the house. The thing, though, is that, the research and the data about adolescent circadian schedules really predates handheld screens and sort of this explosion of screens on the scene. This is something that we've seen in research repeatedly for decades, and research around the world. So, it's the adolescent schedule, this circadian shift, the fact that most teens just naturally are not sleepy before 11 p.m. is something that's really pretty stable and existed even before, every kid had a device or two in their pockets.
All right, thank you, Dr. Whittam. Anything else on that? I'll move.
I could add that's an excellent point, because the earliest studies I did in the late 1990s, cell phones hadn't been invented then. I mean, kids didn't have screens. They didn't have, and the information that I gathered from the CDC study in 2014 bore that out. Yes, devices will be used during the evening, but when kids are tired, they will go to sleep. They will, and I think a lot of it has to do with the parents, as Rachel mentioned, monitoring the use late at night. And I know Dr. Iber, who raised 4 teenagers himself, had some words of wisdom for parents about what to do with their teenagers and their use of devices. Dr. Iber?
Yeah, there's certainly I paid the bills on the phones, and that made it easy to influence the behavior in my home. So I think electronics do degrade the sleep of children and disrupt the sleep of children. However, as was pointed out earlier, Carskadden's work occurred before cell phones were available. And probably very importantly, all of the literature so far that shows that when we grant teens the opportunity to sleep by changing their school time, they do sleep more and they have benefits from it that they reap from it. So I think that's not to say we shouldn't avoid late afternoon caffeine, that we should avoid the use of electronics. Those are all things within the context of what we do in our homes. What we're talking about is a cross-sectional change that affects a huge proportion of high schoolers across the nation, or in this case, in the school district where the decision is being made. And that's a cross-sectional impact that will be substantial. It already has been shown to be substantial. But we have to still do what we can in our homes.
All right, thank you for that. All right, next one. With all the changes going on this year, why not make these changes once we get back to the old normal or close to it? And I respect that opinion. I've heard the opposite opinion too, that some have said this is the perfect time to do it given how disrupted this year has been, and so it'd be a wonderful time to move into this change because this year has been a year of change and upheaval anyway. So making the change now would make some sense. So I'm not. Yes, I hear what you're saying, but I will add one more thing, that any delay in this decision pushes off significant benefits for students, and that to me that doesn't make a lot of sense to push this off any farther. All right, early childhood families were not considered regarding the timing of this announcement. Many families have been put in a difficult position. Can anything be done to make this fair for preschool families who signed up for a preschool time and now have a conflict with the possible new school start dismissal time and preschool time? So this one I might look for some help on. Okay. So Darcy Rodriguez is our early childhood coordinator.
Yeah, as all things districts go, sometimes there are decisions that are being made and it can overlap with timing of things that were already set up and already in motion. And this announcement did come really close in timing with the preschool registration date that we had set up. So it was an unfortunate sort of overlap of 2 big decisions being made at the same time. But we are flexible, and we really do believe that we have a variety of opportunities for families, and that we can accommodate as many families as we can within our system. And we know there will be some flexibility and some movement, definitely of our full day programs. We plan to align them with whatever the district decides to do, the school board decides to do in terms of timing, so that families have access to wraparound care and transportation for our full day preschool classrooms. For our half day classrooms, we are looking at shifting start times forward. We're hoping to start all of our half day classrooms at 8:30. And move the afternoon classrooms also forward by a half an hour, so that we can hopefully align a little bit better with what's going on in the rest of the district. In terms of fairness, it's preschool is a little bit tricky because we have we only have a certain number of spots across the district, and we do the best that we can to accommodate people's first choice. We have a system where there are families that will likely drop out of classes, and there is some flexibility and some movement over the course of the summer. So if there are families that are frustrated with a change that happened, I really encourage them to reach out to our early childhood office, and we will do the best that we can to be aware of those families and try to make sure that they're matching up with a schedule that will work with their family. So I just encourage you to reach out if that's the case, and we will do what we can to make sure that we accommodate.
All right, thank you, Darcy. And then you may have answered this, but can preschool registration be redone after the April vote if the time change is approved? And I think you've largely addressed that.
We have over 270 families across the district who have registered for preschool. And so the redoing of that, I would say about 90% of those families got the classroom of their first choice. And so the idea of redoing a whole preschool registration process that would potentially leave families who had gotten their first choice in a place where they suddenly didn't have that choice just also feels like there's injustice there. So I think what we need to do is work to accommodate whatever families are feeling like if the start time change goes through, that they suddenly are in a place where it isn't working for them. Let's work to try to accommodate those families as best we can.
Okay, another one on the same card. Can the time change be pushed to the 22-23 school year to give families more time to plan? And again, I think I answered that earlier. A delay just means pushing off benefits to students, and hopefully there's enough time for families to adjust between now and the fall. Again, some may disagree with that, but that's where we're at. All right, will there be reduced fees for extended day care for lower income elementary families that may need care but can't afford it? Okay, I guess I'll ask this one too, and then we might be able to wrap it in together. I'm going to ask for some help with these two. And then, are there any negative effects of elementary children spending potentially more hours at school and extended day? Example, 7 hours compared to 9 hours. So maybe the first part of that first, and then then maybe we'll go from there. But actually, I know that I'm thinking of an answer to the second part, and maybe we start with the second part. So I think there's some assumptions being made that students are going to just simply be at school from 7:30 or 7:45 in the morning until 4 and 5 in the afternoon, or 6 in the afternoon, and that will happen in some cases. We have that happening right now, and we have. This wasn't directly part of the question, but Mr. Maurer did some analysis, and we have upwards of 500 elementary students attending our extended school day programming before school currently, or in a normal year, not a COVID year, but in a normal year. When we shift times to 7:45, that all goes away, and so students will not be attending in the morning. Now, we don't know exactly how that's all going to translate to the afternoon, but there's certainly going to be an impact in family schedules. Some are going to love the change, and some are not going to love the change, and we know that. And some are excited about the fact that they won't have that morning before school expense and additional time at school. And so I think so much about this second part of the question, or the second question, has to do with family circumstance that varies widely. So, all right, then if you want to add anything, and then the question about fees for extended day.
So I can comment. Again, my name is Christina Thayer Anderson. I'm our coordinator for our extended day program. And to Dr. Kay's point, we do have students that are currently at school for 10, 11 hours a day. And when we actually look at the data for when students are coming into school, most students are arriving somewhere between 7:20 to 7:45 or so. And so this earlier shift will more align with what we see in our program as families' kind of typical schedules right now. What that means is that then they're coming to school and able to be with their teacher and in their instructional environment, and then coming to extended day after school. We in terms of the actual expense and the contract options, yes, there are scholarships available for families who qualify for free or reduced lunch. There's also, and that's a limited pot, unfortunately, but there are opportunities there. Simultaneously, we partner with county assistance, and that is a much more long-term support for families who would qualify for that assistance. I, like Darcy, would encourage families to reach out to us and to our office because we want to work through all of those issues with any families who have those concerns and have those questions. And simultaneously, the one other piece to keep in mind is that we are, in this unique year, we have had the opportunity to have earlier dismissal times in the afternoon. And so we've tried out this concept of a 4:30 dismissal or contract end time and extended day. We will be continuing that next year for our elementary students in those earlier elementaries, so the other 8 and not Matoska. But at those other elementary schools that have this earliest start time, there will still be that 4:30 contract option, again, in hopes of trying to align and meet many natural schedules that we're seeing right now in our program for when kids are coming to school and then leaving. And so we hope that that will be play to the advantage of families because we realize that it is an expense that perhaps some families were not anticipating.
All right, thank you. All right. When will bus route times be known, as this may impact choices related to flex and extended day enrollment? Mike Terito, our Transportation Director.
When we look at the bus routes, we usually shoot for the middle of August to be able to send in information to the families at that time. And once again, we will be probably putting that out on the Skyward system. But yeah, so we're looking at about August 15th is when we're trying to make sure everything's set and ready to go.
Yeah, and we're targeting, as I said earlier, we're targeting 7:10 as the earliest pickup at elementary level, and with the drop off of 7:30. So that's the window.
Right.
It's a 20 to 25-minute window. So for planning purposes, you can generally count on that. And then afternoon would be similar time.
Yeah,
But-
at the elementary level.
Yeah,
The elementary level would be that
Yep.
2:15, what do we got here? Yeah, 2:15 to probably 3 o'clock-ish, right around there,
Okay.
of kids arriving home. So at the elementary level.
All right, thank you, Mike. I'm concerned about elementary children's safety walking and waiting for buses in the dark and being home for hours alone after school. Could we consider busing middle school and elementary together to have a later start time for elementary? Seems as though the safety of elementary should be more important than keeping a few additional buses. 7:45 start means 7:30 doors open, 7:20 walk to school, 6:40 elementary kids get up. Many studies say an elementary child needs more sleep than a high school student. The long-term effects didn't seem to be studied. Why? Okay, so let's go back. So the first part of this, I talked a little bit about our efforts at the bus stops, and then the issue of after school. Again, we're in terms of what we're able to do, and we're providing an option for families with after-school care, and what families decide to do with that. Certainly, we're going to have a lot of different decisions being made about how to cover the afternoon. For some, what we're offering is going to work out fine, or other options in the community will work out. But yes, we acknowledge this is a change. This is a change to the afternoon schedule for elementary students. And then the comment about middle and elementary together. I don't know, Mike, do you want to take a crack at that one? I mean, it would be more than just a few. It would be more than just a handful of buses. We would essentially shift to a 2-tier system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Currently, we would have to go to a two-tier system, but right now, we use 49 buses at the elementary level and 33 at the secondary. So
and so
from a
by-
number standpoint.
By
it-
tiers, we mean, so one bus will run elementary and middle and high school students. By doing what is suggested, we would combine, let's tier one, and in this case, it'd be, well, let's just, we'd combine 2 of the 3 tiers, so then we don't have 2 tiers. In order to do that, we'd need to add, we did the calculation.
Yeah, it'd be about 82 buses that we would
We
need.
would need to, it would add about $2 million a year to our annual operating expenses, and that's not a realistic, that's not realistic for us to do. I appreciate the suggestion, and we've tried many, many different scenarios, and the reason I know it's actually 1.8 or 1.99. So the reason we know that is because we've tried to think about all these different scenarios and come up with different solutions. But what we've presented to the school board is the best solution we can come up with. And then I don't know if any of our guests want to comment again about elementary versus high school. I think it's a question of biology, and I think we can say it again. Maybe Dr. Iber, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute myself. So yeah, there is a increase in sleep requirement in younger children. However, that's generally before the age of 6 or 8. And so we see very little change in the duration of sleep needs between elementary and high school. What we're seeing primarily is a change in the sleep timing. And so that would tend to biologically hurt the high schoolers. If we look at what's called sleep debt, that is the difference between weekend and weekday sleep, it grows maximum about the end of high school, throughout high school. And that sleep debt is due to the fact that we are waking them up too early and essentially amputating part of their sleep. That doesn't occur so much in elementary school kids because they don't have the circadian change. So the math is that the effects are greater on circadian delay than they are on the amount of sleep that kids need. A gradual, yes, there is a slight reduction in the amount of sleep between elementary and high school, but there's a huge change of a couple of hours in the circadian shift. So that makes what I said earlier true. The high school students are more vulnerable in that respect, although we do want to gather around the elementary school kids on their bus stops, and we understand that we think of them as being vulnerable in that sense. And it makes total sense. Both make sense. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to add one more thing, I think that the solutions that I've heard in the districts across the country are what Dr. Kordmachek suggested, and that is that parents take a role to be a bus stop monitor in a neighborhood. So maybe one parent takes a Monday and the next person takes Tuesday and so on, which it just puts an adult at the bus stop, which is important. And it's usually something that the neighborhood can gather around without having the concern that the kids are standing there alone. So I would strongly encourage those neighborhood people, the parents in the neighborhood, to coalesce around who would take certain days for the bus monitoring, if you will. It seems to have solved the problem clearly in Minneapolis when they made this shift 20 some years ago, and it's been working ever since.
I still see collections at the bus stops in the morning, and I used to be one of those parents out there.
Yeah.
All right, thank you both. What sort of changes are being made to before and after school care for elementary? Currently not very flexible and expensive. So I don't know if you have any additional comment, but I think reaching out and talking would be important, I think, to any parent with a concern or guardian with a concern.
And I can add one other thing. I don't know. Can you hear me? Yes. That we of course, are waiting for the school board to vote on whether we'll move forward with this. But at that point, we also want to hear from families and parents. We don't have rates, contracts, and all of those decisions are definitely not set in stone. And that's where I do think it's really important to hear from families. We have served, we typically serve in a non-COVID year. About a third of our elementary students participate in extended day programming. This change might mean that there are many more families that we would be serving after school. And so we need to hear from you. So while we've been able to reach out to those families that are currently in the program and participating, we would love to hear from more families. And so please do contact us. You can contact me via email or contact our office. But we do appreciate the feedback and are looking for ways to be as flexible as possible to meet all of our families' needs.
Add one piece there too. When we talk about after-school programs too, it's just not extended day. So we will also have a number of different enrichment programs that parents can sign their kids up for after school too. That'll vary from week to week and the duration of it, but those will be additional options for our elementary and our middle school students as well.
All right, thank you. Okay, next item 4, the time change, but why does it have to be such short notice? The timing is too tight to make such drastic family changes. Why can't the change happen when schools switch? I assume we're talking about North and South Campus, which would put us out into the fall of 2024. And I think I've answered that. I think any delay just pushes the benefit out even further. And then just to finish, most families have made life plans. It's not okay for such a disruption without families' consent. You left us out. So I will, certainly be happy to follow up with you on your comments if you'd wish. There's no name or contact info, so if you want to stick around after, I'd be happy to visit about that. But I don't necessarily agree with the sentiment that we've left families out, but I'd certainly love to visit. Okay, and then this one, thank you for considering this difficult but research-based and needed change. So thank you for that. All right, do we have any other, no other cards? Okay. All right. I guess we're at a point then when we can bring it to a close. All of the district folks will hang around here, and if any of the guests want to flag us down and ask any additional questions, we'd be happy to stick around and answer those. But with that, I want to take a moment and thank Dr. Wallstrom and Dr. Eiber and Dr. Woodham for your time. And I know this is very much a passion for the three of you, and you believe in this, and you help school districts out throughout the country in making these decisions. And so we appreciate that you spent a little bit of your evening with us tonight. Very much appreciated. So, all right, with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Steve? Okay, thank you all. Goodbye.